Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to the second part of our series of webinars on high growth markets for first-time exporters. In this webinar, we will be talking about the USA and the opportunities and challenges it presents as a market. The series is being run in partnership with our principal sponsor, HSBC, and UKTI's Overseas Business Network. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am the Digital Content Manager at Open to Export. We are a government-supported online community helping small UK businesses get ready to sell overseas through our content, Ask the Experts forum, our brand new Export Action Plan tool, and our useful contacts with a range of support available to you. Please visit the site to check all this out. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar using the question box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end. One final point. We don't tend to distribute the slides, but we do record the webinar, sending you a copy of it within a week or a few days, as well as uploading it to our website, so you can view this and all of our previous webinars on demand as many times as you like. We have a fantastic panel for you today. Setting the scene will be Brian DeBroca, head of the USA country desk at HSBC. He will be giving an overview of the opportunities and challenges for trading in the USA. Following Brian will be Alexi Martin, Managing Director of Altios International, who will be sharing some of his experiences working with companies exporting to the USA and giving some tips about the country. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Brian to begin today's webinar.
Again, my name is Brian DeBroca, and I'm the head of the USA desk in the UK for our international subsidiary banking team. It's a division of our commercial banking segment. I'm based in London. I've been with HSBC for over 16 years in 3 different US locations before coming here to the UK. I worked in analytical and relationship management segments in global banking, large corporate, and middle market enterprises. I moved across to London from actually Buffalo, New York in the summer of 2014 to man a new desk that we set up for the USA cross-border corridor with this critical trade corridor between the UK and the US. I work closely with colleagues in the US to help our commercial clients tap into the market, the massive USA market, from both export promotion and foreign direct investment, or FDI. With that as the backdrop, I hope that I can shed some general light on the topic of UK exports in what is my technically home country. Now, when you think of high growth export markets for UK companies, I was looking at the topic, I wouldn't blame you for not immediately thinking of the US. Such names as India, China, and perhaps European neighbors such as Germany and France would probably more readily crop up in the mind. And I understand that Open to Export series will be hitting these countries as well. So these are typical countries that I think when you think of UK exports. But the US, I think, is really a place which offers tremendous opportunities for UK companies by virtue of the sheer size of the market. In 2014, the UK ranked as the 7th largest exporter into the US with over 54 billion sterling in goods and services. In fact, the US is expected to remain the main destination for UK exports for at least over the next 15 years. In my part of the presentation, I'll attempt to provide a broad country profile of the US, the world's largest economy. I know it's kind of hard to do in a 10-minute presentation. Second, I wanted to touch on some of the key advantages and disadvantages for selecting the US as an entry target market for UK companies. And finally, I want to highlight some of the promising industry segments that we see with huge potential for UK exporters. In the end, I hope to convey the message that I truly believe the US is an open market with arms that are wide open for receiving British-made goods and services, and it's a country really worthy of your investment consideration. If we can flip to slide 2. Oh, down. One second. Great. Here in slide 2 is a very primitive, basic USA country profile. We introduced some key facts about the US and really kind of set the stage for the size and scope of the exporting opportunity. Needless to say, the US is a massive place with a population of nearly 320 million people, roughly 5 times the population of the UK, growing at a good clip of 0.75% per year compared to the UK at 0.63. It's a massive land area of nearly 10 million square kilometers. The US currency, the mighty US dollar, which has really been at the forefront of world trade since displacing the pound as the globe's largest reserve currency in the late 20th century, really bolstered by the creation of the Federal Reserve just over 100 years ago. The dollar is really viewed as a source of stability that helps lower ultimate risks for exporters. At the end of the day, this translates into better profitability from sterling when you're bringing profits back home. And finally, the high ease of business ranking. We rank number 7 in the world in the World Bank survey, behind only Singapore, New Zealand, Denmark, South Korea, and Norway. And incidentally, UK is ranked number 8, so right after the US. And I think it's a real testament to the legal structure in the place in the US, ease of obtaining credit and other business services, and reasonably priced energy. A lot of factors go into it that makes coming to the US relatively easy for UK companies. Slide 3, William. There it is, great. Here on slide 3, a very basic USA country overview. This slide presents some of the key characteristics of the US market from a business and economic standpoint. Number 1, the US is a market-oriented economy with a very mobile, educated workforce with diverse skill sets. And from an FDI perspective, looking to invest into the country, depending on the geographic region, it should be relatively easy to find skilled workers, qualified workers. Unemployment rate right now is down to 5.1%, down by half from where it peaked in October of 2009 at 10%. So it's a good labor market. Secondly, there's really been a pivot towards services, an outsourcing of, say, manufacturing and insourcing of high margin activities such as design, sourcing, supply chain management. That's a trend that's really continued. Number 3, the third point, the importance of the private sector, I think, can't be overstated. Government spending at each of the various levels is strong. It clearly fuels demand for private sector produced goods. The fourth point, size and geographical diversity, is a key consideration that any exporter must bear in mind. There's absolutely a need to be aware of this diversity, customize your approach to the market, and ensure you're hitting the right areas. Products that do well in some regions could flat out flop in others. You really need to be conscious of local restrictions, regulations, compliance laws. The fifth point, FDI, or again, foreign direct investment, is highly sought after by numerous entities in the US. It's really considered the holy grail by economic development agencies, politicians, they're all over it. Often these foreign sourced projects are competed out to several states and even different regions and countries within a single state. The sixth point, port and supply chains are vast, enables a smooth transit of goods globally using the US as a base. Coastal ports are thriving, but again, so are the inland ports. The ports cities that I'm more familiar with, such as Buffalo, Chicago, Cleveland, even these areas have the infrastructure in place to move goods along. There's also intermodal transport links that crisscross the country, ensuring speedy access to the markets. And finally, the US, I think, can effectively be used as a stepping stone to the NAFTA region, spurring demand and opening up new markets throughout the hemisphere. Really, I think if you can use the US as a safe base to test the market and launch an on-the-ground presence in the region. I'll move on to slide 4. This just sketches out some of the major advantages and challenges that arise when developing a US-centered export strategy. I think on the plus side, again, there's the world-class supply chain infrastructure, there's consumer-led demand, and that consumer-led demand is constantly dreaming up new wants and desires, which I think can help fuel the product life cycle. You can be rejuvenated and keep the product going. The third point, ease of doing business. It's a similar business culture, similar language to a point, albeit, I'll admit that. And I think it's a lower overall risk for a US or for a UK exporter. And finally, the strong rule of law and access to credit, intellectual property rights, and other business rights are aggressively defended in the US. Agencies such as the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, US Patent Office, they regularly prosecute transgressions of data protection and IP and intellectual property laws. On the challenges side, the minus side, I say, we've got massive regional differences amongst states and the regions. You really need to be aware of these differences. And I think the mitigant, it creates opportunities. You can modify products, modify services to hit new markets, nearby markets. Secondly, the strong competition from US domestic companies. You may struggle to set your product apart initially, but I think the mitigant to that is oftentimes UK exports and UK products in general are viewed as quality products. It has a brand cachet, so you might want to say. A third point, customer service expectations. They're high, but I don't think they're materially different from here in the UK. I think that's something that can be easily achieved. The fourth point, significant time differences between 5 and 8 hours. Right now, it's actually 4 and 7 hours since we rolled the clock back last weekend. The mitigant to this is increasingly the IT and communication services are nullifying that. So I don't think that's a big challenge. I'll flip on to slide 5. Opportunities for UK businesses as we see them. Here we identified a handful of sectors that, based on current demand trends, we believe would present material upside potential for UK-made products and services. In the first, automotive. There's 16 global automotive manufacturers present in the States now. And I think more importantly, the automotive manufacturers, the supply chains that they've evolved from tier 1, tier 2, the part supply chains, that's just as important. Trends in the automotive industry, I think, are positive. Light vehicle sales are up 5% year to date in September, over 13 million vehicles. There's a continuing development of digital services, enhancing safety. That's going to create new product demand for the automotive industry. So I think that's a promising sector. Secondly, clean technologies, environmental services. We see solid demand for infrastructure projects in the US, essentially mirroring what I see here in the UK. I mean, there is a significant need for investment in infrastructure in what I know in the US is an aging infrastructure. Third, consumer goods. The power of personal spending, it's huge. It's unrivaled in the world in the US. There's numerous market opportunities to capture there because of that, with companies who can provide unique selling points. Fourth point, services. Consulting and technology services, for example. Financial services vertical is the largest in the world. There's good growth opportunities here, caveated by the need to comply with tougher regulations that are always hitting the financial services industry especially. I think one point I wanted to cite in services, I come from a region of the Midwest, more the Rust Belt area, and Rust Belt cities like Cleveland, like Chicago, like Pittsburgh, are evolving to transform themselves more into service-based cities. And they're really trying to focus on areas like healthcare, education, green technologies, back office support functions that add new demand. And finally, information and communication technology, or ICT. The US is the most advanced nation in that sector. Finally, flip on to slide 6. This basically sets out what HSBC's longer term forecast for the country. It provides a summary of our thinking for the US and the prospect for future growth opportunities for key trade corridors like the UK. Number one, I think the number one point to make, the economic outlook is positive. Low unemployment and job growth is expected to continue. Secondly, the second point to make, trade flows for imports from the UK are also positive. The relatively strong US dollar is a material advantage. As mentioned at the start, while it's not in the top 5, the UK is a major exporter to the US, ranking as the 7th largest country. And finally, the third point, given the size of Chinese imports and the size and proximity of our main NAFTA trading parties, Canada and Mexico, we don't expect any major changes in the, I'll call it, league table of main countries exporting into the US. Interesting exception of the emergence of India, pushing Germany out of the top 5. So in summary, I believe that the key takeaways for companies looking to export into the US are, number one, the size of the market, it's enormous and it's growing. Number two, there's clear differences exist throughout all the 50 states, even wildly within states, but these differences create opportunities. The third point, you're not alone. Help is abundant in terms of both federal, state, local governments, and industrial development agencies NGOs and private sector entities, such as World Trade Center Association, major utility firms in the US will have economic development, and organizations here in the UK, such as UKTI, British American Business, and the like. Fourth point, the closely, tied culture of the US and obvious language benefits effectively provide UK firms what I call a head start in the game of exporting compared to most other countries and companies in other countries. And finally, the fifth, the rule of law in the US is strong and solid, and that sometimes daunting risks of exporting can be minimized by taking the step into the US market. It helps ensure your chance of success. So I think overall the US is a promising, I'd call it a high growth market for export opportunities. So that's my part of the presentation. I'll turn it back to William and Alexi.
My name is Alex Martin. I'm the Managing Director of Altios International, which is a business consulting firm helping exporters from Europe to do business in the US, and that also in other countries worldwide. We have 15 offices in 15 countries in Asia, Europe, and of course in the Americas. In the US, we do work with a lot of exporters from the UK, especially through a program that we've developed with the UK Trade and Investment Organization, and we work with the local consulate here. So thank you everyone for having us during this presentation. Just a brief overview of my background. I'm actually born in Europe and came to the US, so quite opposite to what Brian described. But I've been in the US for more than 15 years, helping exporters from Europe to do business here in the US. I run an office of 25 people, of which we help them to introduce them to the market through market study and also introduction to in-market representatives. What I want to cover today is some very pragmatic approach on doing business in the US. I'm going to try not to overlap on what Brian said with HSBC, but William, if you can move to the next slide, we can also start the presentation. So in a nutshell, this is what Brian described, so I'm not going to go over that, but the consumer spending in the US, especially per capita, is the highest of the biggest country. So this is very important because for any B2C business, the consumer in the US are still spending a lot, and this should be a big market for everyone that wants to tap into the retail business. So on top of that, the US economy has outperformed most of the developed countries, especially in the past few years. And that's probably because of, as Brian said, the rule of laws apply. It's a safe place to invest in, and also probably because some other high growth markets, a few decades actually ago, we were talking about the BRIC country, which are still very important to tap into, but maybe a little bit more difficult sometimes than the US can be. If we can move to the next slide, but this slide was mainly covered also by Brian. Thank you. What I want to say, and is that the US market should be considered almost as the European market. So you have 10, 20 countries in Europe. You should consider the US the same way. It's not because it's one country. It's actually also a federal country. And so there's 50 states sometimes for 50 markets, especially for the wine and spirit, for instance. That is actually very true because you need a license for every single state. So that means you need to find a commercial partner for each state with a local presence. That's just an example. But outside of that, with 300 and change million people in the US, there is actually 5 states that altogether have about a third of the population, so over 100 million inhabitants. And that is the state of California, Florida, Texas, Illinois, and the state of New York. So when you look at those states, they're actually all opposites and all in different regions. So all of them should be considered as separate opportunities, knowing that you can actually tackle the market, the Northeast market, through the New York State and surrounding states before you move into the West Coast, which could be maybe a little bit more challenging, especially with the time difference. But outside of that, it's a very large market, and that has a lot of consequences in the distribution of goods and services throughout the US. So I want to go a little bit about how you should consider entering and growing into the US. And William, if you can move to the actually a couple slides up, we will talk about the entry and growth strategy. So this is basically the type of services that we can provide with Altios, but outside of that, this is what every single companies from abroad, when they are entering or growing into the US market, should consider. So first, entering the market, and you should enter the market with the right strategy, knowing and having in mind that you will need to grow. And you need to grow, quite fast, because there's a lot of competition in the US, and a lot of people want to enter and grow in the US. And there's also a local competition with local manufacturers of goods, industrial goods, consumer goods, but also companies developing very good services from the US market to the US market. So competition is always fierce in the US, and so you have to differentiate yourself from it. So the entry strategy is really how to adapt your offer to the market. A lot of exporters from Europe, from the UK to the US probably have a very good product, a very good technology. But it's very important to adapt it to the local marketing to tap into the right consumer. It's very important to also have the right price, and that price should take into account all the different intermediaries there is in the US, importers, distributors, retailers, and sometimes a combination of all of these. So your intermediary margins are actually much higher in the US than any other country. So your price point at the end could be a lot higher, and that's very important to have in mind right at the beginning so that you're not off when you want to grow. Now, growing into the market, you can do that through a very light presence in the country, piggybacking on a lot of different incubation services that is offered locally. But you should also, down the road, consider a local establishment. And this is quite easy, actually, to set up. But setting up a corporation in the US is not rocket science, as long as you comply with the local laws and local authorities, and you have in mind what are the impacts for your parent company. So we can help you do that. And we also go all the way to helping companies invest in the country through acquisition or potentially through greenfield investments. But for small, medium-sized companies that want to tap into the market, I want to focus on the market entry strategy and what you should have in mind. So William, maybe you can move to the next slide. Great. So when you look at this, I try to put together key success factors for companies that are entering the market, that are not yet present, with no employees, no US subsidiaries, but still wants to walk through in-market representatives, and having the right strategy and the right market knowledge is very important. So that's the first part of anyone that wants to export to the US, is having detailed market knowledge and a clear growth strategy for the next 2 to 3 years. And this is something you can build over time, but before you move into the market and try to sell to importers, distributors, try to have this 2 to 3 year plan. Benchmark the existing competition. You would learn a lot from that. I'm sure there's competition from either Europe or other countries that have entered the US market before you, but potentially there's also local ones that may not have tried to come to Europe, so you may not know them very well, but benchmarking them is very important, and how they are organized in terms of either developing their services or manufacturing their goods, all the way to the end user or consumers, and depending if you're talking B2C or B2B type of business. The market channel pricing strategy is something I've just talked about, but it is clear that having in mind that you can find it in the US, one single importer, distributors, and sales force all in one under one roof is actually something that's pretty much non-existent. You would typically find different in-market representatives for importers, for distributors, and for potentially also the sales force, the brokers, the agents. All of them take a different margin and add up to your final price for your consumer or your end users, OEMs in the market. So it is very clear that it's actually a major impact for you. Just to give you an example, one of our companies, tried to sell goods into the retail food business, for instance, and had to actually up the price quite a bit, especially because the distributors was not selling. They were providing a catalog to different buyers, but they were not selling. So they had to add a broker to it, which added another 10 or 5% sometimes to the price point. And you're already a different positioning in the market if you're comparing to the competition. So identifying suitable partners in the US is very clear, but it can be done by product, by region. So try to tackle the market with a region focus rather than nationwide. Communication and marketing is key and should definitely be adapted to the US way of doing business. A good working structure to ensure a win-win relationship with your in-market representatives is also very important. And that involves having in place an agreement, a contract. The rule of laws apply in the US. They're mostly based on jurisprudence, but that's also why you're not protected by any code of law, and you need also a lawyer very much upfront in your relationship to make sure that the relationship you have is win-win and that it could be long-term, especially protecting your brand. Because the use of your brand, if you give that to a distributor, potentially could be at risk. The distributor could be taken over the use of your brand. So this is something that you need to have in mind, and there's ways to protect it, especially bringing the good attorneys upfront. Patience in investment is definitely key, and having a plan for 2 to 3 years, I think, is very important to be successful onto the US market. William, we can give a few examples. That is something I could share with the different attendees. But I wanted to, before we move on to the case studies, maybe you go back just real quick once, just to make the difference in between the different intermediaries. I mentioned the in-market representatives, which are the outsourced sales force. So those are the manufacturers' rep, the sales agents, the brokers. They do not buy the product or sell the product. They actually get the purchase order to the distributor and take a commission on the price point from the distributor to your end user or your client or the retailers. The customers' rep, which are defined by the fact that they buy the product and sell the product, are distributors, wholesalers, but most of the time they provide a logistic approach to getting your goods to the market rather than pushing yourself. So you need to have both in place. I wanted to enlighten some of those comments with concrete case studies with some of our clients on the US market. The first one, if you can move to the next slide. The first one is a company that we've provided strategic market study before entering the market so that they can really choose which channels of distribution, and outside of the regional aspect, but also the channels of distribution based on the product line that they have. So we're talking here about freshly baked goods that are baked in the market but are bought frozen. So we're talking about food dedicated to the retail stores and potentially to the food service business. Looking into the market, there's actually 4 different distribution channels in the market, which maybe in Europe is only comprised of 2. But the in-store bakery is actually the one that we've been focused on for this company. rather than trying to tap into the food service, which has a lot of nationwide distribution. It's a bit more complicated to tap into. So we focused on the in-store bakery. But now in-stores, bakeries, and different retail stores in the US are very regional. There's very few retailers in the food sectors, and that actually applies to a lot of different retail channels that are not nationwide. You know, the ones, the nationwide, the Kroger, the Walmart, the Costco. But outside of them, there's a lot of very big, very large retail chains on the regional level. Some chains like Publix in Florida is 1,200 stores and is just in Florida. HEB is just in Texas, and there is about 400 stores. Those are the retailers that you want to work with, but getting into them, you would need the right distribution, you would need the right brokers that would open the doors for you. And that applies with every single distribution channels that you see on this chart. William, we can move to the next example. The next example is really a good case studies and success stories of a company that has patience and has invested into the US market, but step by step. So this actually is a good example of my first introduction slide, with first having a right strategy to enter the market. So grow yourself through in-market rep with the right offer is what we help this company do. And they provide, it's candle manufacturers. They sell to the major department stores, some boutique stores, very high-end candles. We're talking about, about $100 at retail price for the consumers. So getting to that was definitely done, through distribution, and then getting into the department stores through agents, as well as boutique stores direct from the distributor. But the profitability was not very high. So we advised our clients to set up a subsidiary office in the US so that they could take over the distribution as well as the importing part. And they could also go direct to the small boutique stores, but also hire local team to be able to grow their sales with the major department stores, as well as potentially open their own stores. And this is actually a strategy that we've implemented with this client over the course of 5 years. So it didn't take overnight to do it, but now it's a very successful business and very profitable as well. William, I don't know if we have enough time for more case studies, but if I can mention also one part, maybe you can go back to just before, to the joint venture one. This is a company that approached the market without any idea on how to do business here. They do gift with purchase for the cosmetic brands, so they sell to the L'Oreal, the Estée Lauder in the market. They have a great development in Europe, but they wanted to tap into the US market. So we did a market approach strategy study on how to do business in the US with the different resources that they have, which were mostly based actually in Europe and Asia, but nothing in the US. And when you look at the competition is very much set up in the US with showrooms, with the local team. And so if you want to exist in the market and position yourself with the Estée Lauder, the L'Oreal, and the similar brands, you need to be at least as big as your competitor. So we advise this company to, instead of going direct, which most likely would have been a failure, to either acquire a company or set up their own subsidiary in the market. And actually that's what we've done. In the end, it's not setting up their subsidiary. It's actually a mix of that. It's a joint venture with one of the target that we approach for acquisition that was open to a joint venture for now and not an acquisition. But it's a good way of doing business and have a critical mass also in the US, a little bit quicker, but of course it requires a bit more of investment. William, I think we we can wrap up. I've already introduced Altios, but we've been in business for 25 years. I'll be more than happy to answer some of your questions following up on this webinar. And again, we work also with the UK trade and investment teams. So I'm sure we'll be in touch with most of you, and happy to help you get into the US market.
Cool, thank you, Alexi. So I think to now move on to the questions, as you were saying. The first question we have is from Paul, and it is regarding advice on exporting directly to US consumers, shipping individual items directly. I think it's probably for you, Alexi, if you want to start on that.
Do we know what type of industry we're talking about? I'm assuming B2C.
It doesn't say here, but just in general.
I think selling direct to consumers in the US is usually very challenging. You need at least a local logistic platform to be able to do so, and there could be also a fiscal impact of that. So before I can answer really this question, we would require a little bit more of information. But selling direct to consumers, this could be done a little bit through e-commerce, and this is something we can also help you understand. But there could be a fiscal impact also doing business direct from the UK to the US. And CPAs are here to answer this type of questions. So we'll be happy to connect Paul to the right people if we cannot answer right away the question.
Cool. Thank you, Alexi. On to the next question. This is from Mike, and this is probably for you, Brian. He says he banks with HSBC Business Banking in the UK. He asks if he can open a US bank account so his distributors can pay them there without having international transfer costs and without having to have a US company. What advice would you give for setting up an account there in USA to deal with distributors?
Excuse me, I think depending on where the location is, with HSBC and our platform in the US, we definitely have business banking services, and we'd be able to open it up and kind of use the information, the base information we would have on the accounts here in the UK. But I think it's more of a geographic play if it's in our footprint of the US, which is really focused on the coastal areas for business banking services. That's a relatively easy process to do, to get the account opened and get it reported in online. We get the visibility on the transactions from anywhere you are in the globe. So it depends on geographies, but it's definitely something we can do.
Thank you, Brian. Really good to hear you on that headset as well. A question here from Lucy, which is how is branding and packaging design purchased in the US? Is it more based on a tender process, or is it about building personal relationships? Alexi, do you want to take that?
I couldn't hear very well. What type of packaging?
So it's from Lucy, and the question is, how is branding and packaging design purchased in the US? Is it more based on a tender process or about building personal relationships?
I think it's both. I think the design of the packaging, the branding, it's very specific. It should be very specific to the US market. Even from the UK, where obviously we're speaking the same language, there's still a lot of differences that needs to apply and to adapt to your service or your offer. So when it comes to packaging, I think part of it is real relationship with local buyers, and as well having the right team, especially engineers, salespeople, designers. That could be local hire, and this is something that is always challenging for small, medium-sized businesses that we work with. But they can build that step by step by having a way of communication to ease the process of having an engineer maybe back home in the UK that could intervene locally, or that could come on business trips to help the design of the packaging, the goods. But having a local team first for sales development, I think is key also to grow your business and build a relationship with large OEM in the business.
Thank you, Alexis. And just one last question, and it's quite an interesting one. It's what sales tax requirements are there for selling digital download products in the US? For example, would we have to register for the equivalent of VAT here in the UK? I don't know, Brian or Alexis, who would like to speak to that?
Brian, you want to answer this?
Well, the concept of VAT doesn't exist in the U.S., so that we wouldn't need to do that. I'm not sure about the specifics of that particular industry, though. But yeah, of course, we'd be paying federal taxes, state taxes, maybe even local, depends on where the business is located.
Yeah, I think one important thing is that the taxes is usually there's a sales tax that apply, from the seller to the buyer. If the buyer is the end user, so that could be the consumer. Most of the time, that's what is the case. Or it could be also an industry, as long as they don't resell the goods, then a sales tax apply. But the sales tax is a state tax. So when it comes to that, you need to know where you're doing business and to whom you're selling and shipping the goods. And when you're doing e-commerce, this could be very challenging because this needs to apply for all 50 states, depending on if the consumers are actually located everywhere in the country. So the sales tax is a state tax, but the VAT concept, you're right, Brian, it doesn't exist.
Cool. Thank you, Alexis, and thank you, Brian. So I think that's going to be our lot for today in terms of questions. Just to note that if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to ask them on our forum, the RCA Experts Forum, and our speakers and wider community of experts will hopefully see to those questions generally within a few days. And another note, sorry for any tech difficulties earlier, but I think we still got a lot of really good content there, so hopefully that's been useful for everyone. So thank you to both our speakers. Really great overview and great insight into exporting to America. And also thank you to the Overseas Business Network and to HSBC for helping us with this series. A reminder that the series returns tomorrow with our China webinar at 2 p.m. tomorrow, followed by our final webinar of the series, which is India at 3:30. Following the High Growth Market series, we will be dealing with how to reach international customers online. That'll be at the end of November. And just a quick reminder that we will send you a recording of the slides in the next few days. And you can catch any of our previous webinars on demand by just going to the Special Features tab on the Open to Export website and selecting either recent or upcoming webinars. And also, I think Alexis was saying that he'd be happy to circulate some of those slides towards the end as well. So please get in touch if you'd like to see a bit more of Alexis' presentation in more detail. We've also this week just launched our new Export Action Plan tool. This is a free and easy online planning tool to help exporters get ready to sell overseas. We are also launching a competition with it. So if you complete your own action plan, then you can stand to win up to £3,000 of funding to implement your plans. So please have a look at the site and have a go at this. It's definitely a exciting new product we've released. So that's all from us today. Please take our survey as you exit to let us know what you thought of the webinar and give us any suggestions and improvements for future topics. Again, apologies for the tech difficulties, but thank you for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.